When Dr. Mark Thompson became Seattle's most beloved animal doctor, pet owners trusted him with their beloved companions' lives. But when his methamphetamine addiction and insurance fraud schemes consumed him, he began euthanizing healthy animals for profit and murdering witnesses who discovered his crimes, turning veterinary clinics into deadly pharmaceutical laboratories. Before starting the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Now, let's get back to the video. The Pacific Northwest rain drummed against the windows of Seattle's upscale Queen Anne Veterinary District as Dr. Mark Thompson prepared surgical instruments and controlled substances for what would become the most dangerous animal procedure of his 15-year career as Washington State's most respected veterinarian and animal healthcare specialist. At 44 years old, Mark had established himself as Seattle's premier veterinary surgeon, specializing in exotic animal medicine and emergency pet care that attracted wealthy pet owners, professional dog breeders, and animal rescue organizations who valued his expertise in complex surgical procedures and his reputation for providing compassionate care during pets' most critical medical emergencies. Mark's veterinary practice operated from a state-of-the-art animal hospital in Seattle's affluent Belltown district, featuring advanced surgical suites, pharmaceutical storage facilities, and intensive care units that allowed him to handle the most challenging veterinary cases while maintaining the highest standards of animal health care and client service. His clientele included tech executives whose expensive purebred animals required specialized medical attention, entertainment industry professionals whose working animals needed expert veterinary care, and elderly clients whose companion animals represented their most important emotional relationships. The interior of Mark's veterinary hospital reflected his mastery of animal medicine and his understanding of devoted pet owners' expectations for both medical excellence and emotional support during their animals' health crises, featuring walls displaying veterinary awards from prestigious professional organizations, photographs of successful surgical outcomes, and testimonials from grateful pet owners whose beloved companions had been saved through his skilled intervention and dedication to animal welfare. But beneath Mark's reputation for veterinary excellence lay a dangerous combination of methamphetamine addiction, systematic insurance fraud, and calculated murder that had transformed his animal hospital into criminal enterprises where threatening pet owners and suspicious investigators met their fate through veterinary drug overdoses and witness elimination during vulnerable pet care consultations. "Good morning, Dr. Thompson," said Eleanor Whitman, her 9 o'clock appointment, and a 72-year-old retired librarian whose 13-year-old golden retriever required ongoing treatment for a chronic condition that Mark had been managing for over 2 years with increasingly expensive procedures and medications. Eleanor had recently questioned the necessity of some treatments after consulting with other veterinarians who suggested her dog's condition could be managed more simply and economically. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitman," Mark replied with the veterinary authority and animal care expertise that had made him legendary among Seattle's pet-loving community, who viewed him as both medical professional and compassionate advocate capable of providing life-saving treatment while offering emotional support during the most difficult decisions about beloved animals' health care and end-of-life care. "I've reviewed Buddy's latest test results, and I believe we need to proceed with the specialized treatment protocol we discussed to ensure his comfort and quality of life during this challenging period." Eleanor had become Mark's most dangerous client, not because of her pet's medical complexity or her emotional attachment to her animal, but because of her recent discovery of unnecessary procedures and her growing awareness of the insurance fraud operation that Mark had been conducting while supposedly providing legitimate veterinary care to Seattle's trusting pet owners and their beloved companions. What Eleanor didn't know was that Mark had been systematically defrauding pet insurance companies and murdering suspicious clients for over 3 years, using his veterinary expertise and access to controlled pharmaceutical substances to perform unnecessary procedures while eliminating anyone who discovered his fraudulent billing practices and drug diversion activities. Mark's transformation from dedicated veterinarian to calculating killer had begun 5 years earlier, when his methamphetamine addiction had escalated from occasional recreational use at Seattle's underground party scene to daily dependency that consumed his veterinary practice profits and forced him into desperate relationships with organized crime figures who controlled Washington state's drug distribution networks and pharmaceutical theft operations. His addiction had grown to cost over $600 per day, while his access to veterinary-grade controlled substances had provided perfect opportunities for drug diversion and pharmaceutical fraud that generated substantial additional income. Faced with increasing pressure from drug suppliers and potential exposure by suspicious pet insurance investigators, Mark had begun using his veterinary expertise to conduct systematic fraud operations, performing unnecessary procedures on healthy animals while billing insurance companies for expensive treatments and diverting controlled substances for street sale through criminal networks that specialized in veterinary pharmaceutical theft and distribution. His criminal activities had escalated when several pet owners had discovered evidence of unnecessary procedures and had threatened to report their suspicions to veterinary licensing authorities and law enforcement agencies, investigating insurance fraud patterns targeting pet health care and veterinary pharmaceutical diversion. Mark had murdered his first victim, a suspicious pet owner who had questioned expensive treatment bills, by administering a lethal dose of pentobarbital disguised as routine vaccination during what appeared to be standard veterinary care for her elderly cat. The success of his first murder had convinced Mark that eliminating threatening pet owners and suspicious investigators was both necessary for protecting his fraud operation and relatively simple to accomplish, given his legitimate access to lethal veterinary drugs and his ability to stage deaths as medical emergencies or allergic reactions that occurred during routine pet care visits. Over the following 3 years, Mark had murdered 8 additional individuals using various veterinary pharmaceutical methods that took advantage of his medical knowledge, his access to controlled substances during routine veterinary consultations, and his ability to disguise human deaths as medical emergencies that occurred during stressful pet care situations or allergic reactions to veterinary office environments. His victims had been carefully selected based on their discovery of his fraudulent activities, their potential cooperation with authorities, and their isolated circumstances during private veterinary consultations with their beloved animals. His victims had included Dr. Patricia Chen, a veterinary insurance investigator who had discovered evidence of fraudulent billing and whose office consultation had resulted in fatal injection of concentrated propofol disguised as accidental exposure to veterinary anesthetics. Jennifer Martinez, a pet owner who had reported suspicious billing practices and whose routine pet visit had ended in fatal allergic reaction to deliberately administered veterinary allergens. And David Foster, a federal pharmaceutical diversion investigator who had been tracking controlled substance theft and whose veterinary practice inspection had resulted in fatal exposure to concentrated xylazine disguised as veterinary chemical accident. Dr. Thompson, I need to discuss some serious concerns about insurance fraud and reports of pharmaceutical diversion connected to your veterinary practice, said Detective Sarah Rodriguez of the Seattle Police Department's Pharmaceutical Crimes Division as she arrived at Mark's animal hospital carrying warrants to inspect his controlled substance storage and interview him about suspicious activities. Detective Rodriguez specialized in investigating veterinary pharmaceutical crimes and had developed expertise in recognizing patterns of drug diversion and insurance fraud that exploited veterinary practices and pet owners' emotional vulnerability during animal healthcare crises. Detective Rodriguez's investigation represented an existential threat to Mark's criminal operation, as her law enforcement expertise and access to pharmaceutical crime databases could expose the systematic fraud operations and connect him to multiple suspicious deaths during veterinary consultations and pet care services. Of course, Detective Rodriguez, Mark replied, though he felt the familiar surge of methamphetamine-induced paranoia and criminal desperation that accompanied any official scrutiny of his veterinary operations by law enforcement officers, who possessed the training and resources to detect evidence of pharmaceutical diversion and systematic murder, disguised as medical emergencies or allergic reactions during veterinary care situations. Animal welfare and pharmaceutical security are always my highest priorities, and I want to cooperate with any investigation that might help protect pets and ensure that veterinary services operate according to all applicable medical standards and legal requirements. Detective Rodriguez consulted detailed reports from pharmaceutical diversion investigators and suspicious death analysts that showed patterns of controlled substance theft and client deaths that suggested systematic criminal activity rather than random pharmaceutical accidents or legitimate veterinary medical emergencies during routine animal health care procedures. Dr. Thompson, I've been investigating reports of pharmaceutical diversion and insurance fraud that appear to be connected to your veterinary practice and the clients who bring their animals here for treatment, Detective Rodriguez said with the investigative precision that had made her successful in solving complex pharmaceutical crime cases. 8 individuals who were clients of your veterinary practice have died under suspicious circumstances, with several of these deaths occurring after the victims had questioned expensive treatment bills or had discovered evidence of unnecessary procedures during their pet's veterinary care. The detective's identification of the fraud patterns and her recognition of the timing correlation between client complaints and deaths confirmed Mark's worst fears that his criminal activities had been analyzed and connected to his systematic elimination of suspicious pet owners and exploitation of veterinary access for organized pharmaceutical diversion and insurance fraud operations. Mark's response was swift and deadly as he realized that eliminating Detective Rodriguez was essential for protecting his criminal enterprise and preventing exposure of his systematic fraud and murder operations. Detective Rodriguez, I think there may be some misunderstanding about the emotional stress that pet owners experience during their animals' medical crises, and the unfortunate reality that people sometimes have adverse reactions to veterinary environments despite proper safety protocols, Mark said, while discreetly reaching for a modified veterinary syringe that he had loaded with concentrated succinylcholine for emergency elimination of law enforcement threats through rapid muscle paralysis and respiratory failure. Perhaps we could discuss these concerns in my surgical suite, where I can demonstrate the veterinary procedures that might explain these tragic coincidences. Veterinary medicine involves complex pharmaceutical protocols that might appear suspicious to those unfamiliar with animal healthcare emergency procedures and controlled substance management. Detective Rodriguez agreed to examine Mark's veterinary procedures, not realizing that the veterinarian was leading her to a sterile surgical suite where previous murders had been committed, and where Mark planned to kill her using his weaponized syringe that would deliver fatal muscle paralysis while appearing to be accidental injection during demonstration of veterinary techniques. Mark's plan involved convincing Detective Rodriguez to observe specific veterinary injection procedures while explaining animal care protocols, then administering the lethal injection that would cause rapid respiratory paralysis while appearing to be accidental exposure to veterinary anesthetics rather than deliberate murder by a veterinarian protecting his pharmaceutical diversion and insurance fraud operations. But Mark's carefully planned murder of the detective was about to be prevented by the unexpected arrival of federal agents who had been investigating methamphetamine trafficking networks and had identified connections to his veterinary practice. Special Agent Michael Torres of the DEA's Diversion Control Division had been conducting a comprehensive investigation into methamphetamine trafficking and veterinary pharmaceutical crimes that exploited animal healthcare businesses to facilitate controlled substance diversion and eliminate potential witnesses to drug trafficking activities. Agent Torres specialized in investigating veterinary drug crimes and had developed expertise in tracking criminal veterinarians who were used to divert pharmaceutical supplies while conducting systematic elimination of threats to methamphetamine distribution networks. The federal investigation had been initiated by reports from multiple veterinary pharmaceutical suppliers and controlled substance monitoring programs who had noticed patterns of suspicious drug orders and veterinary-related deaths that suggested organized criminal networks were using animal hospitals to divert controlled substances while eliminating potential witnesses through sophisticated veterinary pharmaceutical poisoning methods. Agent Torres had been conducting surveillance of Mark's methamphetamine procurement activities and veterinary operations, and had documented evidence of systematic methamphetamine abuse, involvement in pharmaceutical diversion, and suspicious patterns of client deaths that suggested his veterinary expertise was being used for organized criminal activity rather than legitimate animal healthcare services. "Dr. Mark Thompson, I'm Special Agent Torres with the DEA," he announced as he entered the surgical suite where Mark was preparing to poison Detective Rodriguez. "I have federal warrants for your arrest on charges of controlled substance diversion, methamphetamine trafficking, systematic insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and multiple counts of first-degree murder related to your systematic exploitation of veterinary services for criminal pharmaceutical activities and drug-related elimination operations." Mark's reaction to the federal agent's intervention was a combination of veterinary authority confusion and desperate attempts to maintain his medical credibility, as he realized that law enforcement agencies at multiple levels had been investigating his drug activities and had connected them to systematic client murders and organized pharmaceutical crimes. His carefully maintained reputation as a compassionate veterinarian had failed to protect him from comprehensive investigation by agencies with expertise in methamphetamine trafficking and veterinary pharmaceutical diversion. Special Agent Torres, there must be some serious misunderstanding about legitimate veterinary medicine and the complex pharmaceutical protocols involved in animal health care that require access to controlled substances and specialized medical procedures, Mark said frantically while abandoning his plan to poison Detective Rodriguez and attempting to preserve some semblance of medical professionalism, despite the overwhelming evidence against his criminal activities. "I am a licensed veterinarian with 15 years of experience providing emergency animal health care for Seattle's pet owners and their beloved companions. All of my veterinary work complies with established medical standards and pharmaceutical regulations designed to ensure animal welfare and client safety." Detective Rodriguez looked absolutely stunned as she realized how close she had come to being murdered by the veterinarian she had been investigating for pharmaceutical crimes. Her pharmaceutical crimes investigation had not only exposed Mark's diversion and murder operation, but it also prevented her own death at the hands of a killer who had been using veterinary services as cover for systematic elimination of clients and law enforcement threats. The comprehensive investigation that followed Mark's arrest revealed the full scope of his criminal enterprise and the sophisticated methods he had developed to exploit veterinary expertise for systematic pharmaceutical crimes and murder. Forensic analysis of Mark's veterinary operations revealed extensive evidence of his pharmaceutical crimes, including sophisticated systems for diverting controlled substances, fraudulent billing schemes targeting pet insurance companies, and detailed records showing coordination between unnecessary procedures and client elimination schedules. His animal hospital contained weaponized veterinary equipment, methamphetamine trafficking documentation, and comprehensive files containing medical records that had been falsified to justify expensive treatments and pharmaceutical theft. The investigation also uncovered Mark's connections to organized crime figures who had been coordinating methamphetamine trafficking and pharmaceutical diversion operations while using his veterinary access to steal controlled substances and eliminate potential witnesses through sophisticated veterinary pharmaceutical poisoning methods disguised as medical emergencies. Most disturbing was the discovery of Mark's detailed knowledge of veterinary pharmaceuticals and human physiology, which he had used to develop increasingly sophisticated methods for causing human death through veterinary drugs while eliminating threats who discovered his insurance fraud and pharmaceutical diversion operations. Dr. Mark Thompson was ultimately convicted of 9 counts of first-degree murder, systematic pharmaceutical diversion, methamphetamine trafficking, insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit organized criminal enterprise activities, and numerous other charges related to his exploitation of veterinary services for criminal pharmaceutical activities and drug-related elimination operations. The conviction sent unprecedented shockwaves throughout Seattle's veterinary community, prompting immediate reforms in veterinary licensing, controlled substance monitoring, and methamphetamine addiction prevention measures designed to protect pet owners from exploitation by trusted veterinary professionals involved in organized criminal activities. Several other veterinarians and animal healthcare providers were investigated for similar criminal activities, resulting in enhanced oversight of veterinary operations and new requirements for pharmaceutical security, insurance billing verification, and client protection measures that made it more difficult for criminals to exploit veterinary services for systematic pharmaceutical crimes and murder. Detective Rodriguez and Special Agent Torres received recognition for their collaborative investigation and became specialists in veterinary crime investigation, developing new techniques for identifying pharmaceutical diversion operations and protecting pet owners from exploitation by criminal veterinary professionals. Eleanor Whitman and other surviving pet owners required extensive veterinary care verification and insurance claim reviews to overcome the trauma of learning that their trusted veterinarian had been systematically defrauding them and murdering clients while exploiting his veterinary access for organized criminal activities. The veterinary industry implemented comprehensive new safety protocols designed to protect pet owners from exploitation by unethical veterinary practitioners. The case prompted comprehensive changes in veterinary medicine regulation, including mandatory background checks and drug testing for all licensed veterinarians, enhanced oversight of controlled substance storage and pharmaceutical procedures, real-time monitoring of veterinary billing and insurance claims, and new reporting procedures for suspicious veterinary activities involving client safety or potential pharmaceutical diversion indicators. Mark's conviction also led to increased cooperation between veterinary medical associations and law enforcement agencies investigating organized crime, with new protocols designed to identify veterinary practices that might be exploiting their pharmaceutical access for systematic criminal activities while eliminating potential witnesses. The veterinary medicine and broader animal healthcare industries implemented revolutionary new safety measures, including enhanced screening procedures for veterinary professionals, comprehensive pet owner protection programs, mandatory reporting of suspicious veterinary activities, and improved training for recognizing signs of methamphetamine addiction and organized crime involvement among veterinarians. 5 years after Mark's conviction and life imprisonment, Seattle's veterinary community continued to implement safeguards designed to protect pet owners from veterinarians who might abuse their positions of trust in pharmaceutical access for criminal purposes. The veterinarian who had promised to heal animals and provide compassionate care had instead used his veterinary expertise and pharmaceutical access to commit systematic fraud and murder, while exploiting pet owners' emotional vulnerability and trust during their beloved animals' healthcare crises. However, his crimes had been thoroughly exposed and his victims had found justice through the dedication of investigators who refused to accept client deaths as mere medical emergencies. Dr. Mark Thompson's final procedure had been permanently terminated by the surgical precision of justice, where he would serve multiple life sentences without possibility of parole, proving that even veterinary professionals who attempted to exploit their medical expertise for criminal gain could be identified, investigated, and brought to justice when dedicated law enforcement agencies worked together to protect innocent pet owners from predatory veterinarians. The veterinarian's final procedure had concluded with his permanent removal from practice, serving as a lasting reminder that those entrusted with animal welfare must never abuse that sacred responsibility, and that veterinary professionals who would exploit pet owners' trust and pharmaceutical access for criminal gain will ultimately face the full consequences of their betrayal of veterinary medicine and animal compassion. Thank you very much for listening. Please let us know what you think of this story in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any other videos.